I next want to move on to one of our guests today then. So as I mentioned at the outset, Thomas Liebig is a senior migration specialist in the OECD. I've known Thomas for many years. Our paths used to cross in the good old days when we would attend nice conferences in places like Paris and a whole range of other attractive locations. So maybe not as attractive today, but nevertheless still really interested in what you have to say, Thomas. So many thanks for your willingness to reflect on what it is the ESRI has produced this morning. So I'll hand over to you now. So I think you need to use some slides. You want to share the screen?
Thank you very much, Ellen, for this kind of introduction and for the opportunity to comment on this excellent report. And I would really like to congratulate the authors to the work that they have done. What I'm going to try to do now in the next couple of minutes in my comments is basically to zoom out. So the report, I think, has its richness in zooming in on some of the granularities by looking really at country of origin differences. And I'm going to provide you some general comments from an OECD perspective based on some joint work that we have been doing with the European Commission on indicators of immigrant integration. And so as the report highlighted, there's actually a pretty high educational attainment of immigrants in Ireland. And that's actually one of the core differences, one of the core things where Ireland sticks out in international comparison when you look at the educational composition of the migrant population, both in absolute terms, but also relative to the native born. You see that among the European countries, Ireland is here clearly on top. You see here Poland up. These are data from 2017. Since then, because Poland had a lot of low-skilled immigration since, so that has certainly changed. So we can safely assume that Ireland's probably on top now in Europe with regard to the educational attainment of the immigrant population in the country. And in any case, also compare, and it in that sense, it compares well with the settlement countries like Canada and Australia. On the other hand, the skills of migrants are not well used. And now I hope you can see that in my screen, that Ireland is actually here pretty much at the end of the scale in terms of overqualification. That was also one of the findings of the report. That said, we should put that in perspective that overall migrants' employment rates in Ireland are pretty high. They're actually higher than those of the native born, still at least prior to COVID, and it will be interesting to see how that will possibly change. At the same time, unemployment rates, as we have also seen, are significantly high, especially for some groups. So overall labor market participation is high. But many of those migrants who are in jobs, as we've also seen in Frank's presentation, are working below their qualification level. And that's actually something that when you look at the other countries which have even higher overqualification of migrants, these are essentially the Southern European countries plus Korea, which is a special case here, where there has been a lot of migration into lesser skilled jobs prior to the economic crisis. So a lot of the migrants who have arrived, they had relatively good qualifications, but have been taken up lesser skilled jobs. Also, a very key particularity of the Irish situation when we look at the overall picture of migration to Ireland is that for a large part of the migration, it has been dominated by free mobility from other European countries, whereas other categories like family, work, refugees, work from non-EU countries have been less important, even though that composition has somewhat shifted in recent years with the larger arrival of refugees. And also clearly when you have a situation where you have more people coming, the family category becomes also more relevant over time. And that actually leads us to some of the to the core actually of the report. I mean, the richness really relies in it's revealing the very strong country of origin effects, and that for me was perhaps the most fascinating thing, particularly to look at the large variation of outcomes that we see, particularly for different African countries. I found that very fascinating in the report, And so the question is really, is this origin or migrant category what we're talking here about? What we know from the work that we have been doing and from the literature is that actually it's a lot more a migrant category than country of origin. Precisely because different categories of migrants tend to have different challenges. Refugees, they have their forced migration category by nature, they have specific vulnerabilities and have accordingly lower outcomes everywhere. Labor migrants generally arrive as a job, so it's not surprising that they have high employment rates and then lower poverty, and it goes all the way along into the social integration aspects, which are all linked with having a job. So clearly, when the economic situation changes, and Ireland has seen that very clearly with the economic crisis of 2008, that situation can also change for labor migrants, but at least they have a head start. Family migrants are actually the largest group outside of the free mobility considerations in most countries, but here clearly we have very large and diverse situations, depending on whether you've joined a national or whether you have joined a refugee, or whether you're actually accompanying family of a labor migrant. You will have very different circumstances. And in any case, you will have some attachment to the host country by the definition that you're either joining somebody or accompanying somebody who was in the country. At the same kind, these are often the blind spot of integration, precisely because the conditions for family reunification often are that the principal migrant is in employment. So this is a large group that's often not so much in the focus, and where often we see in many countries pretty poor outcomes. And then obviously, particularly important in the Irish case, as we've seen, is the intra-EU migration, which is actually a mix between labor and family. And we've done some estimates. It's a little bit more labor than family when you disaggregate it. Clearly, we see better outcomes across the board for that group, including at given qualification levels. At the same time, interesting in the Irish case is that the labor market differences between EU and non-EU migrants tend to be larger than elsewhere. But still, there's an overall pretty favorable picture for Ireland. Over time, however, and that was also mentioned, that duration of residence is actually a big factor in explaining some of the results and the differences that you see across groups. And here clearly you see, when you look at the employment rate, for example, it's very clear when you're a refugee, you first need some integration support to even get started in the host country. So your employment rates are initially very low. The same goes for family migrants, but eventually they get to the level of the native born. For labor migrants, actually, because they generally arrive with a job, the convergence in that sense is the opposite sense. Their employment rate tends to decline over time, and after a certain number of years, around 20 years actually in the EU as a whole, eventually these groups tend to converge. Even so, when you look more at that in a more granular way, you will see that some groups never converge even after many years in the host country. So to give some kind of conclusion and outlook, when we look at the broader picture, currently Ireland compares favorably on most integration indicators for both EU and non-EU migrants. But we have seen the large differences across groups in the report. What will happen with COVID? That's obviously also at the core of our work that we're doing at the OECD in the moment, because we try to monitor the situation and look at what could happen. Clearly, and Ireland is a really good example here, because you've had the global economic crisis of 2008, where immigrants were particularly hard hit in Ireland as in other countries. So there is some indication that it will be the case again, and actually the early employment and unemployment figures that we get in from some countries show in that direction. Actually, for some countries, we've just gotten the data from Norway, which in many ways is actually not so dissimilar from Ireland in terms of its migrant composition, has very strong adverse impact on immigrants' unemployment, much higher than for the native-born in the early labor market outcomes, and that's also what we would expect because of the high asymmetry and the sectoral impact. We have a strong migrant presence in some sectors which are hard hit, notably the hospitality industry, but clearly it's also very early to assess the impact. That notwithstanding, the relatively high education level of most migrants in Ireland, and also the relatively high share of EU migrants, could certainly mitigate these effects, not necessarily so much relative to the native-born, because they probably will be harder hit, but particularly when you look at it in international comparison, so it will probably be less of a disproportionate impact in Ireland than elsewhere. So with that, I look forward to the further debate on the report. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for that. Thomas, great to get the international perspective, actually. And can I just say, on the this international comparison, the education levels amongst immigrants in Ireland, and I remember we started looking at this many years ago, and sometimes when you're doing research and you see a statistic and your immediate reaction is, oh, there must be something wrong. Okay, but 20 years later, we're still looking at the data and we're still seeing this phenomenon in the data of the higher education levels of immigrants in Ireland. So it's always comforting to get an international perspective and to know we're not, the data is not wrong, and that factor is still present. Okay, I'm going to encourage people actually again to start submitting questions through the Q&A function, and as I said, I'll try and moderate some questions later. But before that, I want to invite Salome Mbugua to speak to us. And Salome, I think you were again yet another person who has been a visitor to the ESRI, and we're again sorry that we're again not giving you a cup of coffee and having a face-to-face chat. But thanks for coming along in this virtual setting, and we look forward to your response to the report. So over to you, Salome.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you to ESRI for inviting me to give a response for a second time. I was with you in 2018. I welcome the approach which has been taken in this study on migrant integration using data from census of 2016. The outcome clearly affirms migrants are not a homogeneous group. And even though migrants may come from the same region, for example, the continent as it's put by Fran in her study, or country, some migrants may need more support than others. This is very evident, for example, with the case of African region, where we have Togo, Somalia, and Agora. Through our experience of work in AkiDwA, it's very evident that this group of people are very isolated and pushed to the margin of the society due to language problem. Well, you also see on the other hand that Sudan is leading within the region with highly skilled jobs for people from Sudan. We also see that unemployment for Sudanese generally is very high. I want also to thank the Minister, David Stanton, for his commitment in integration and for his work really in the implementation of the integration strategy. AkiDwA has been involved in the monitoring of this strategy, which is overseen by the department itself. I note that this is the final year for this strategy. ESRI has undertaken several studies since 2017, as you are saying, and the Department of Integration together, they can do an evaluation for the current strategy. And I believe with this, we'll have enough information to inform proper action that will ensure true integration of migrants in Ireland moving forward. As the minister said, government and society, because society are them individuals who employ or who get to employ people, must take responsibility. We must acknowledge migration as a permanent feature in Ireland. 1 in 8 of us in this country are from a migrant background. There are many people like myself who have been in this country for over 25 years now. I work with a young migrant woman who arrived in this country when she was only 7 years old. She's now almost in her 30s. She has studied her primary, secondary, and has recently graduated in performing arts, but she still cannot be able to get a job in her field of profession. This affirms the need for the state to ensure equality of opportunity, equality of access, equality of participation for all. In my similar response to ESRI in 2018, I urged the Irish government to address discrimination. We must ask ourselves what actions have been taken or developed to address racism and discrimination in Ireland as we continue to mourn the killing of George Floyd in USA. While there may not be physical killing in Ireland for migrants, and especially Black Africans who seem to be very much affected, they face many challenges, including denial of right to employment due to discrimination. This study continued to voice this. In 2005, many migrant parents of Irish citizens were granted rights to reside in this country. One of the conditions was to become economically viable. AkiDwA worked with Spirasi and Business in the Community, a program funded by the Department of Justice and Equality, the EPIC project. All we've heard along from our work in AkiDwA are the many challenges facing migrants in accessing employment, with lack of recognition for qualifications. And while many migrants do apply for jobs or recognition of qualification, Quality and Qualification Ireland does not give them a person an equivalent recognition for their qualifications. Requirement on work experience is also a key major hindrance for many migrants who may never have worked in Ireland before, which employer require. If they have no Irish sounding names, they won't even be considered for interviews. Generally, discrimination is still a huge, big issue, and we have to address it, Minister, maybe taking different actions now. It was quite interesting to see the analysis provided by the study based on the regions, which clearly shows that point of origin determine integration journey. The advantage that people from EEA countries have, since they are free to live and work in Ireland, where migrants from non-EE are disadvantaged, with the immigration status clearly determining their integration prospect. Those within the asylum process have been repeated again and again would be the most affected, giving the right to work has only become effective in July 2018. And still we had people who had negative response and never got that right to work. We also really need to consider such kind of people and opening the right to work more broadly. In AkiDwA, we have worked with both program refugees and asylum seekers who would have had spent time in refugee camps or in neighboring countries. And something that doesn't come out of the census is that these people have been living with the trauma and have language barrier. They've never worked before, casual work or proper employment. They have no education because they spent most of their time in the camp. This migrant group definitely need targeted approach for meaningful integration. On education and language barrier, the study shows migrants arriving in Ireland are more likely to hold a third level qualification or gain a third level education in Ireland. Our work experience again from AkiDwA shows that many migrants value education. For example, our work with those in direct provision shows that they have key interest in taking courses, while many parents of Irish citizens preferred going back to college to at least acquire Irish qualification. However, when they do this, they end up in jobs that do not match their qualification, far away below. For example, we have a migrant woman with a PhD who is working in social care or in care work. We have a migrant man with a master's degree in law working in security job. They do it to make ends meet and remain resilient, though that's the only job that they can access. These people need to be facilitated to get jobs that matches their qualifications to improve their quality of life. Education for children of migrants has also been highlighted in this research, and where it clearly says that primary and secondary level education is available to all students, regardless of citizenship or place of birth. Migrant children face obstacles in addition to those faced by non-migrants, including language difficulties, discrimination, differences in parent resources. This is an issue which needs to be dealt with, as many parents from migrant background from some regions are not able to support their children with homework. We have seen that they have difficulties with the English language, which is normally used in school. We also have to address racist bullying and how it affects children morale, not wanting to go to school every time. Fee is a huge problem for people wanting to go into that level, and in particular of children growing in direct provision. After they do their living cert, their parents will not be able to afford taking them for that level because of the high fee. Other costs related as well, and traveling to college, accommodation, or any other hidden cost. Parents living in direct provision are unable to support their children completely in education after leaving certificate. When we look at the employment, the study shows that those of white ethnicity have an advantage in the labor market, both in terms of access to employment and job quality. And although we have seen again, migrants from non-EU countries have high language and education attainment, they still have struggles, or they struggle to access labor market. In-depth research is needed to explore again what types of jobs these non-EU migrants are working at, or they are holding, the wages they are getting and the conditions in those jobs. The research also says that refugees or those with leave to remain in Ireland are likely to have poor outcome in the labor market than those found of migrants. And they cite their ethnic bias among potential. It's a given example of how people from Liberia, Algeria, and Tunisia, that ethnicity does not play such a significant role. This may be because of the countries have fewer ethnicity Black migrants, as it says. They suggest that Black Africans may be facing the greatest level of ethnic disadvantage in the labor market, even when their language and education are held consistently. I was actually looking, for example, for Nigeria, because among in the African region, Nigeria is the country that has high population in Ireland, and it doesn't seem actually they are treated well in the labor market. They still struggle with the labor market. And I think there should be a specific research done on Nigerians in the labor market in Ireland. Black ethnic group is performing poorly in terms of both unemployment and occupational attainment. And these keep coming again and again. I really want to request the minister, because we have the decade for people of African descent, to try and maybe come up with strategy to explore on what can be done to support the people of African descent. And in particular, for the future generations of migrants in particular, and specifically those of African descent. Citizens have also been identified as key in accessing labor market, but also, like the minister has said and Fran has said in her presentation, it also helps people get a sense of belonging. It helps people and give them ability to focus for the future with confidence. People from countries of blood with high level of civil conflict or persecution generally have been seen to be to have high level of unemployment, and these people need to be supported. Like I said earlier, that they have challenges with trauma and language as well, and they are very isolated, not wanting actually to come out or mix with the rest of the society. I wanted actually to talk about preventative measures for second generation, not to experience what our generation of the first migrant have experienced. And while this study has not been able to produce proper data on second generation, it will be important into the second generation of migrants. I said that, you know, the children that we have actually gotten as first generation are in their 20s, and also the children that people came up with are in their 30s, who have spent a lot of time in this country, and they should be prevented or protected from falling into unemployment or jobs that doesn't match their qualification, even when studied with other indigenous Irish and they don't qualify to be the same. We also need a societal change or shift of actually wanting to employ our own, because there was that highlight of that in the report, that Ireland also know that, you know, diversity is good, and actually valuing everybody for what they can give or what they can offer. But the society needs to change in the way they look at migrants, and in particular also the asylum seekers and refugees. We must address discrimination. We must actually look into how this problem of discrimination can be dealt with, maybe coming up with policies and law that would help. We also have to address the stereotype that pertains to migrants, and in particular people seeking protection, asylum seekers, and the treatment of asylum seekers themselves. The EPIC project I mentioned earlier is also a very good project that could be replicated around the country to prepare people of migrant background with how they can access labor market, preparation of CVs, shadowing of jobs, and mentoring as well. Support for trauma is important, and also on mental health, especially mental health has affected many migrants that we have worked with and that we have seen. To finish, Minister, I would like to say that a coordinated approach is needed in the whole area of integration. A bottom-top approach is important, as well as a top-bottom approach. This, I mean, the importance of actually taking integration back into the local areas and into the local authorities, and working with the local authorities to address issues of integration or meaningful integration, because that's where people are living. So the department linking with the local authority and working towards or through integration of migrants in the country. And I hope the next strategy will be able to be informed by what this study is saying, and also the strategy which is coming to an end, and that we have many migrants in this country who can also help in shaping the future of integration in this country, and they should be involved in decision making and also in shaping that future. Thank you.